It starts quietly, almost imperceptibly. A child sitting at the kitchen table, noticing the subtle tension in a parent's voice, the unspoken anger, the emptiness behind a gaze that should feel safe. At 7, 8, or 9 years old, they begin to understand a truth no child should have to carry: if I don't hold this family together, no one will. And in that silent assumption of responsibility, something shifts. Something ancient clicks in the brain and the heart alike. The child begins to shrink inside while simultaneously stretching beyond what is healthy, learning the impossible: how to feel everyone else's feelings, how to predict the storms before they hit, how to survive in an environment that asks far too much of someone so small. And so, the paradox emerges. The world sees them as mature, responsible, extraordinary. Such a strong child, people say, unaware that behind the poisoned smiles, a different child lurks, a child whose own needs were shelved long ago. A child who learned that love comes at the price of self-erasure, who discovered that safety is not given, but earned through emotional vigilance. This is the quiet tragedy of children who grow up emotionally before their bodies even have a chance to catch up. It is not bravery. It is adaptation. It is survival. Why does this happen? Why are some children forced into emotional adulthood long before they even understand what childhood should feel like? The answer lies not in failure or weakness, but in mechanisms honed in environments too complex for their age. Psychologists call this parentification, the process by which a child becomes the caretaker, the peacekeeper, the silent therapist for parents or siblings. It manifests in hypervigilance, chronic emotional responsibility, and early coping strategies that, while necessary for survival, can calcify into lifelong patterns. The child learns that their needs are dangerous, that the emotions of others must always come first, that showing vulnerability is a risk. And this pattern, so essential in a turbulent home, becomes a template for every relationship that follows. Within families, this plays out in small, almost invisible ways. A child notices the parent who cannot manage anger, the sibling who refuses to confront pain, the quiet dread in the room that must be managed with smiles and compliance. Later, in friendships, they overfunction, carrying the emotional weight of others while denying their own. In romantic relationships, they instinctively prioritize the partner's comfort above their own, often without realizing why. Every step is guided by an internalized rule: survive first, self second. The body may grow, the voice may strengthen, but the inner child remains trapped, observing, protecting, and performing. This is the invisible architecture of early emotional maturation. The mechanisms are subtle but precise. Hypervigilance rewires the nervous system. Chronic emotional responsibility rewires the brain's reward systems, teaching the child to derive safety and approval from the regulation of others. Parentification teaches self-denial as virtue, and yet it also encodes anxiety, mistrust, and a quiet but persistent fear of abandonment. Every smile given when none is felt, every disagreement avoided, every tear swallowed becomes a brick in a wall that the child builds around their own psyche, a wall that will persist into adulthood if unexamined. And yet, there is complexity here that must be acknowledged. Children who grow up too fast are not damaged for the sake of a label. They are adaptive, intelligent, and remarkably resilient. Their brains are tuned to the needs of their environment. They have developed subtle emotional literacy, foresight, and sensitivity that most adults never acquire. But this resilience comes at a cost. The self is fragmented, authenticity deferred, playfulness postponed indefinitely. A child who smiles in a living room tense with conflict may become an adult who smiles in silence while the body and mind quietly scream for recognition, rest, and safety. What does this look like in adult life? subtle patterns emerge. There is hyper-independence, a refusal to ask for help even when needed. There is chronic over-functioning in relationships, a compulsion to fix and manage while rarely seeking support. Joy may feel unfamiliar, even threatening, because it is unearned. Rest may feel like indulgence, even danger. Boundaries are elusive, as saying no triggers a lifelong association with guilt and betrayal. Love may feel transactional, intimacy fraught with unspoken anxiety. These adults often appear capable, high-functioning, even enviable, but beneath the surface, the child who grew too fast is still present, quietly shaping perception, relationships, and self-worth. Here lies the crucial insight: premature emotional maturation is not a gift. It is an adaptation. Recognizing this is the first step toward true understanding and healing. The inner child must be acknowledged, witnessed, and gradually allowed to reclaim a space once denied. This is not about fixing the past or rewriting childhood. It is about noticing what was necessary to survive, honoring it, and then gently releasing the patterns that no longer serve. It is about learning to prioritize one's own emotional needs without guilt, to feel without performance, to rest without fear, and to play without self-judgment. The path is not simple, and it is rarely linear. Healing is slow, demanding, and requires a willingness to feel emotions that were once too risky. Rage, sorrow, frustration, and unmet longing must be acknowledged and held with compassion. It is in this reclamation of self that the paradox resolves: strength and sensitivity coexist, autonomy and connection integrate, maturity and childlike presence can finally align. The child who grew too fast does not disappear, they are gently invited home, recognized, and finally allowed to breathe. This journey extends beyond the self. Once the patterns of early adaptation are understood, the way one interacts with friends, partners, colleagues, and even strangers transforms. Relationships become less about obligation and performance and more about genuine exchange. Boundaries can be established without shame, presence without anxiety. Emotional regulation shifts from survival-driven hypervigilance to conscious, self-aware participation. And most importantly, the body and mind begin to align, allowing the adult self to inhabit the full spectrum of human experience rather than the narrow channels forged by early necessity. As we reflect on this, it is worth noting a truth often overlooked: the child who grew up too fast is not weak. They were gifted with the insight and sensitivity to survive chaos, to feel what others could not, to carry burdens without complaint. And yet, their gift was imposed, not chosen, and it is time to disentangle it from obligation. The measure of adulthood is not merely the endurance of hardship, but the capacity to integrate, to feel fully, to inhabit life authentically, and to finally allow rest. So, if you recognize yourself in this narrative, know this: you do not need to carry the emotional weight you learned to hold as a child. You are allowed to be human now, not a perpetual survivor. You are permitted to cry, to play, to rest, to feel unproductive, to ask for support, and to receive it. The inner child may be tender, anxious, and uncertain, but they're your guide, not your jailer. By listening, witnessing, and gradually integrating the self you once deferred, you create a life in which both child and adult coexist, not as enemies, but as allies. Premature emotional maturation shaped you, but it does not define the limits of who you can become. You have the right to experience life as it was always meant to be felt. And now, perhaps for the first time, the child who once carried the impossible can rest. And you, the adult who inherited their resilience, can finally live, fully and gently, in the present.